Hello, Neogenians. Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. Today we are continuing to explore the Tree of Knowledge, aka the Tree of Light, and how we can understand it by using the mathematical system of the Neogenian system of meta-rationalism, and how it shows how to synthesize Gnosticism and Kabbalah. So if you don't know what any of that means, that's okay, that's fine. Essentially what we're going to be doing today is exploring the mathematical structure of existence and showing how we can use that to understand the connection between the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death through the Tree of Knowledge. And you can see we have those all out right here. This is going to be an extremely important video, so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're watching. I want to remind you, though, that this is way more than a channel. We are a revolution of consciousness here to wake the world the fuck up. So remember to hit like, subscribe, and share to spread this like fire. If you want to help out even more, become a member. You get access to a lot of great stuff like members only videos and free downloads on transformation, alchemy, Kabbalah, etc. And for those who are members at the Pathfinder tier or higher, we're actually having a members only video right after this called Why Would a Loving God Create Hell? Here's the Truth. So you can be a part of that if you'd like. Also, you can check out my books. And if you're looking for a free way to support, you can follow me on Spotify. We're growing really fast over on Spotify and reaching an entirely new audience there. So if you have a Spotify account, it's completely free to follow me. So follow me there. Links to all of those things, my books, my Spotify channel, etc., they're in the description of this video. All right, my friends, let us begin. We are going to be understanding the connection between the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death through the Tree of Knowledge. Now, last week, we explored the Tree of Knowledge and its mathematical properties. Today, we're going to show how it all connects to the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death. If you didn't see last week's video, that's okay. But if you want a more firm understanding of what we're going to be talking about today, I do recommend that you watch that. It's an important video and will make this video much clearer, but you can still watch this video as a standalone by itself. So just as a very quick recap and a very quick refresher, throughout my channel, or throughout my videos, we've been exploring the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death as a psychological model, the Tree of Life representing consciousness and the tree and different states of consciousness, and the Tree of Death as representing shadow versions of those states of consciousness. You climb the tree to get to higher levels of consciousness, and you clear blockages on the Tree of Death to clear up any obstacles that may be in your way to ascend to the highest levels of consciousness. Now, what we have introduced is the Tree of Knowledge. What the Tree of Knowledge is it describes the mathematical structure of light itself, or the pleroma, or the Ein Sof Or. And it also is a concept that I developed in terms of the Neogenian system and the Neogenian interpretation of Gnosticism. And we can use this to combine these systems together, both Kabbalah and Gnostic. So we're going to see, and underpinned by the Neogenian interpretation. Now, if all that sounded like, what the hell are you talking about? That's totally fine. That was kind of a lot of information all at once. But let's just get started. I'll start talking like I always do, and it'll start to make sense. It'll start to click as we go forward. You'll see what's going on. So what we're going to do here is, let's see, let me bring up my notes on screen because I do have a lot of notes for this video. All right, so let's just get started. We are going to start by talking about the Tree of Knowledge. But okay, actually, before we do that, let me explain it this way. First of all, the Tree of Knowledge, aka the Tree of Light, is the foundational zeroth world. It's the foundational of everything. Everything. Zoe, or Zoe, is the 10th eon, and her name means life, and she gives rise, she's number 10, she gives rise to the 10 Sephirot on the Tree of Life. That 11 should not be there. And I just realized, hold on. I just realized that I printed out the wrong version of the tree of death. So here. Okay. All right. So I just had to make some adjustments. So Zoe is the 10th and gives rise to the 10th to the 10 Sephirot on the tree of life. The 11th is not counted. It's traditionally not counted as one. And Akamoth, her name means death, and she gives rise to the 11 Kalyptos on the tree of death. And the 11th is counted on the tree of death. And so Zoe, the 10th Eon, gives rise to the 10 Sephirot, and Akamoth, the Eon of death, gives rise to the 11 Kalyptos on the tree of death. Okay, so the reason why that I'm saying all that, if any of that's confusing, we talked about that in last video, but the reason why I'm saying that is this. So the tree of knowledge / the tree of light is the foundation and gives rise to these, okay? But because it gives rise to these, it's also within them as well, okay? So in terms of degree of what is foundational, this one, the tree of knowledge, is above these two trees. But we can also understand it as being within them, because the light of the tree of knowledge, of course, emanates and gives rise to the tree of life, and the tree of death is twisted light, essentially, broken light. And so the tree of knowledge is still within these two. So what I mean by that is the tree of life and the tree of death are related in terms of, so the tree of death is also called the Sitra Achra, which means the other side. So the tree of death is literally the other side of the tree of life. So you could imagine taking them like this, right? Taking them like this. And you could imagine taking the tree of knowledge as sandwiching them in the middle, because it is the core of the tree of life and the tree of death, because the tree of life and tree of death are derivative of the tree of light / tree of knowledge, okay? And again, like I said, I know this, I hit my monitor here. This can sound like a lot to take in, but just go with it. It'll start to click and start to make sense. So let's talk about this. So let's start with, let's just start and seeing how they see how they all connect together. All right. So first, the first eon that we have on the tree of knowledge is the one, Tochen. And we saw last time that what Tochen, or the one, represents is eternal cyclical motion. Okay? So the one represents eternal cyclical motion. Now, we have a very specific equation for that, which is this equation right here, known as Euler's formula. In the Neogenian system, we call this the source formula. And essentially what this is a mathematical formula that simply describes eternal motion of a circle, of a point going around in a circle. So you could imagine a point on the circumference of a circle going around and around and around and around, okay? But here's the other aspect, is this side over here. So this side over here, cos x plus I sine x, means that every circle is actually represented by two waves. So what that means is that a circle is also two waves. In the same way that 2 plus 2 is also 4, it's just different ways of looking at the information. Two waves is the same information as looking at a circle. So it's kind of like if you look at this pen straight on, it seems like a point. Or yeah, it seems like a point. But if you were to turn the pen on its side, now it seems like a line. It's the same object, just from a different perspective. So a circle is the same object as two sinusoidal waves, a pair of sinusoidal waves. And these are in constant motion, eternal motion. So we have the one, we have the one as constant motion, represented by Euler's formula, the source formula, which is represented as a circle and two sinusoidal waves. Now, how does this connect to the tree of life and the tree of death? Well, Keter means the crown, and it represents unity. So within Keter and the crown, the core of Keter and the crown is the unity of the cyclical nature of the one. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, Talmiel is the top of the tree of the Kalyptos, and Talmiel means the twins of God, or the division of God, and represents separation, duality, etc., etc. So Keter represents unity, means the crown. Talmiel means the twins of God, or the division of God, and represents division. And so at the heart of both of them, we have the one as a united circle, or two sinusoidal waves. All right, so do you see at the heart of Keter, which is unity, is the eternal circle. At the heart of Talmiel, which is the twins of God, or the division of God, are the two sinusoidal waves. So you could think of the two different aspects here. The cyclical aspect, the unified aspect is here. This is the aspect of, oops, it's not on screen. This is the aspect of unity right here. Okay, this is unity. This is the twins of God, the two sinusoidal waves, cos x plus I sin x. And so you see what I'm showing you here is that the tree of knowledge, the tree of light, grounds the expressions of the tree of life and the tree of death. Okay, so hopefully that one example will help things click into place. The tree of knowledge, the tree of life are the foundational principles that give rise to how they are expressed in either the tree of life or the tree of death. And we want to synthesize them together. And that's why the tree of knowledge represents that synthesis as well, because the tree of knowledge is both. It's all these things. All things arise from it. And that's very important to understand, that we want to synthesize all of this together. We don't want just division, and we don't want just unity. Just division is chaos and destruction. Just unity is loneliness and boredom. We want unity and multiplicity, a unity expressing itself as a multiplicity, etc. Okay? And so we get that by not denying one aspect or the other, but unifying them. And the tree of knowledge / the tree of light is that inner core, the foundation, the first principle that underlies all of these ways that it gets expressed, whether that be through life or through death in our symbolic system. Okay? So let's, by the way, I also want to mention that while we are using mathematics here, we are using a symbolic system to explain it in a simplified way. All right. So don't expect this to be 100% rigorous. If you are looking for 100% rigor, check out my book, Meta Rationalism, which explores the structure of the one with mathematical precision, no symbolism. So don't expect there to be like tree of life, tree of death, or any kind of symbol. There's no, it's all reason and mathematics and philosophy. But I'm just saying, as a tool here, we are understanding it through symbolism. And because symbolism is not 100% perfect, there's going to be some times when not everything is mathematically precise, okay? But it's mathematically precise when we use the math. Now, I know that might kind of sound confusing, but you have to understand that mathematics and archetypal symbolism are very different things. So mathematics is true for everyone all the time. 2 + 2 = 4 for everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, even if you don't believe that it's true. It is. When it comes to symbolism, such as someone on the live stream asked me earlier, is Yahweh Saturn? It depends what system you're looking at. Traditionally, Yahweh is usually more associated with Jupiter/Zeus, and Satan is usually associated with Saturn. But in Gnosticism, they associate Yahweh with Satan. So you could what I mean to say is there's no one right answer. It's symbolism, but we're using both right now at the same time. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay. This is a very important video, by the way. So stick with it. And this kind of information is the stuff that is absolutely key. So let's continue, and it will become more clear as we move on. And watch the video previous to this one if you want a full explanation of the tree of light/tree of knowledge, which will make all this a lot easier to understand as well. Okay, so let's continue. We saw that the one is eternal cyclical motion defined by the source formula, which represents a cyclical motion, but also two sinusoidal waves. Keter, the crown, which represents the unity of God, is underpinned by the cyclical aspect of the one. And the tree of death, the first klipot Talmiel, the twins of God, is underpinned by the two sinusoidal waveforms of the one. So let's now move down to the second eon. The second eon on the tree of knowledge is called Kalyptos. Kalyptos means the hidden one, and Kalyptos represents qualia, or experience in general. Just the idea of, because if we have just the concept of, say, mathematical motion, that's not paired with any kind of, like, what is the experience of that? Kalyptos represents the experience of the mathematical nature of reality. So it is literally experience, which is different from form, which is the structure, right? There's structure and experience. Kalyptos represents the experience, the subjective part of it. But we're not going so far as subjectivity right now. It's just experience in general. And that's what Kalyptos represents, just experience. Now, this is connected to Chokhmah on the tree of life, which means wisdom, and Gahagiel on the tree of death, which is usually called the hinderer. Okay? But it's also known as, it represents a limit or even confusion, right? So underpinning this idea of Chokhmah and Gahagiel is Kalyptos, which is just experience in general. What Chokhmah is usually associated with is experiencing undifferentiated information. So Chokhmah is associated with, let's say, the experience of like the pure white light of the source, or a very high level experience, but it's it's pure, it's undifferentiated. So it's just it's information, but it's not information that has yet been organized into a certain pattern. It's just kind of like everything is nothing at the same time. So if you were to imagine like a blinding white light that contained everything, it contains everything, but since there's no difference or separation, it's just that white. So it's a very simple experience. Okay. So Chokhmah is that experience of a simplistic, undifferentiated experience that Kabbalists call wisdom, which is underlined by Kalyptos, which is just the ability to experience in general. And what Gahagiel represents is limit or even confusion. It's when the fact that there seems to be so think of it like this. Think about someone meditating and they are just hit by this influx of wisdom, but it's confused. They have no way of organizing it. So it ultimately becomes almost chaotic. And so it's that confusion or limitation that is imposed by Gahagiel. So you could almost think of Chokhmah as the experience of the unity, right? So Keter represents the unity. Chokhmah is like the experience of the unity. And Gahagiel is like the experience of division. Okay? So remember, at the 1, we had pure unity that is also associated with 2 sinusoidal waves. The unity is associated with Keter, the 2 twins of God with Talmiel. Kalyptos is pure experience. Chokhmah is experience of the unity. Gahagiel is the experience of division, or just limitation, or it's ultimately a faulty, confused experience. All right, but underlying it, whether it's an experience of unity or a faulty, confused experience in some way, is the simple concept of Kalyptos, experience in general. So hopefully you're starting to see the pattern here, as each one is expressed in a certain way, underpinned by the tree of knowledge / the tree of light. So let's go on to eon number 3, which is Protophanes. Protophanes means the first appearing one. And what that introduces is frequency. So if we bring in our formulas here, this is the source formula. This one is also the source formula, just more parameters have been added to it, okay? And so the parameter of frequency is found right here. Okay, you can see there's an F right there. There's an F right here, and an F right here. And so Protophanes is literally the F in this equation. It introduces the idea of frequency. Why is that important? Because frequency introduces difference. So we have frequency as well as multiplicity. With Protophanes comes multiplicity and frequency. And why this is important is because by varying the frequency, you vary your experience. So think of it like this. If you have pure white light and pass it through a prism, that pure white light becomes the myriad colors of a rainbow. And each of that light has a different frequency. If all the light was the same frequency, it would be the same color. But because it has different frequencies, there are different colors and you can have different experiences. So do you see where before with Kalyptos, we just had experience in general, but it was just this undifferentiated experience in terms of Chokhmah, or a confused experience in terms of Gahagiel. But with Protophanes, we get multiplicity and variation and difference. Okay? So multiplicity, variation, and difference. That's what Protophanes is. And everything that we're exploring on the tree of light, by the way, is a property of light. Light underpins everything, whether it's expressed in a certain way or twisted in a certain way. Light underpins everything. So, Protophanes represents frequency and multiplicity, and this corresponds on the tree of life to Binah. So, Binah is called understanding. What Binah represents, though, is structure, order, form. She's often called the mother or the womb of creation. So traditionally what she does is she takes the information from Chokhmah and structures it into something that is into a pattern. Okay? So you just have the pure information that's undifferentiated. Binah differentiates it and constructs it into a pattern. Protophanes is why you're able to do that, because you have the concept of frequency, difference, and multiplicity in general. Okay? Now, on the tree of death, the corresponding klipot is Satariel. Satariel is called the concealer, or the concealer of God. And what Satariel does is uses that structure and form to create Maya, illusion, even the belief that multiplicity is what is fundamental. So where Binah creates structure and clarity, Satariel still structures, but does so to conceal, to create Maya, to create illusion. But all this is possible because of Protophanes, which underpins all of them. Okay, so you can see that the Ionic tree is being expressed, its power, its light is being expressed in a different way, whether through it's the tree of life as order and structure, or let's say through the tree of death as concealment and illusion. It's all the same principle, but expressed in a different way. Okay, let's move on. And before we do that, all right, so we have discussed the one, Kalyptos and Protophanes, and its associated corresponding Sephirot or Kelipot. So normally on the tree of life or the tree of death, you go from 1, 2, 3 to 4. But what we're going to do here is actually we're going to go from 1, 2, 3 to 6. And the reason we're going to do that is because this forms a very important trinity. From here to here, and from here to here. This is essentially the Gnostic Trinity, where you have the Father, the Mother, and the Child. So that's why we're doing it in this way, because I want to show you how these are linked together. You have the Father, the Mother, and the Child. The Father is Kalyptos, the Mother is Protophanes, and the Child is Autogenes. And this entire structure is all Barbelo. If you're familiar with Gnostic lore, this is all Barbelo. The Father, the Mother, and the Child are Barbelo. But if you don't know what that means, that's fine. Just ignore that. So let's talk about what Autogenes is. So Autogenes is also associated with in Gnostic lore as the Christ. And what Autogenes represents is just the center of subjectivity, a unique center of subjectivity, a subjective viewpoint. And the reason why Autogenes arises this way is because when you have experience paired with form and difference, you automatically, what arises from that is a subjective center. Because if you have an experience occurring where a variation of experience is occurring, it's not the same thing, there's variation of some kind. There is a subjective center that is doing the experiencing. And that is what Autogenes represents, a unique center of subjectivity. Okay? And this is Autogenes. Autogenes means self-generated, by the way. The hidden one, the first revealed one, the self-generated. That's what Kalyptos, Protophanes, and Autogenes means. So Autogenes is also Christ, but not Jesus Christ. Christ as the transcendent Christ, which is simply a unique center of subjectivity. So the corresponding Sephirot is Tiferet or Tifereth. Tiferet or Tifereth, and Thagarian or Thagarion. Thagarian, Tiferet. So underpinning these is Autogenes. So what does this represent? Tiferet is called beauty because it's the harmonizer, and this is represented as Christ as immanent rather than Christ as transcendent. Christ as immanent. And what does Tiferet actually mean? Or what does it represent? Tiferet is the ego, but the ego in service to the higher self. So here, underpinning the ego, you just have a unique center of subjectivity, which makes sense because that is required for there to be an ego. And in the tree of life, that gets expressed as the ego in service to the higher self. On the corresponding side on the tree of death, the Kalypot is Thagarian, and Thagarian is called the disputer, not the harmonizer. and is represented as the archetypal pattern of the Antichrist. And this is the ego in service to itself. Okay? The ego in service to itself. So here, underpinning them, you just have Autogenes, which is the center of subjectivity in the tree of life. It gets expressed as the ego in service to the higher self. In the tree of death, it gets represented as the ego in service to itself. All right. So now that we've explored this triad or this trinity, let's go back to our regularly scheduled pattern. Over here, you have Davathai. Davathai in Gnostic lore means a variety of different things. One of Davathai's meanings is love. Love, and in terms of the tree of knowledge, what she represents is amplitude. Amplitude and intensity. Amplitude and intensity. If we look back at our equation, the source formula, Davathai is all the A's, which represents amplitude and intensity. So if you have a certain wave and increase its amplitude, it becomes a greater wave. Paired with that is the experience of intensity. So Davathai is the fundamental property of light, of amplitude, as experienced as intensity. Now, this gets expressed on the tree of life as chesed. Chesed means mercy, and chesed represents empathy, growth, care, loving expansion. The corresponding Kalyptos on the tree of death is Gahag Shekla, which is called the Devourer, which represents excess, too much, smothering love. Love that ultimately gets expressed to such a degree that it smothers someone. Amplitude can also be decreased as well. You can increase the amplitude or decrease the amplitude. And how that gets represented in Gahag Shekla is the idea of, let's say you take the idea of love and you increase the amplitude of love for your family, your religion, and your nation, while decreasing your love for another nation or another religion or another people, etc. So this can lead to essentially like bigotry, racism, etc., things like this, where it's like, oh, my race is the best race, or my nation is the best nation, or my religion is the... And so you increase the amplitude of love for who you think is worthy for that, while decreasing the love for others, which can get transformed into hate. You decrease the amplitude enough, you can get negative amplitude. So we have simply the idea of amplitude and intensity, which gets expressed in chesed as mercy, love, and care and growth, which gets twisted by Gahag Shekla as a smothering love and a toxic expression of that. All right, let's move on to Gevura, or the fifth, which is Harmazel on the Tree of Knowledge. Okay, so on the Tree of Knowledge / Tree of Light, we have Harmazel. What Harmazel represents in terms of Gnostic lore, a variety of things, but Harmazel is associated with form. And in terms of the Neogenian system and the source formula, Harmazel is associated with phase shift, and that is the phi or phi that you can see right here, and up here. And what phase shift does is simply, if you have a wave, I know this isn't very wavy, but imagine it's a wave. Phase shift just slides it over. aligned, it shifts the wave, okay? Now, the reason why that is important is because when you have many waves interacting together, when you shift the waves, it can dramatically alter the structure or form of that wave, okay? So it's ultimately about structuring by adjusting phase. So phase gives form to signals. So let's see how this gets expressed. So we have Harmazel, which is phase shift, giving form in the tree of light / tree of knowledge. Its corresponding sephirot is Gevura or Gevura, and Golahav or Golahav on the tree of death. So what does this represent? So remember, this is phase, phase and form. Gevura is called justice, or even sometimes severity, and represents order, law, willpower. And Golahav is called the burner and represents dictatorship, fascism, cruelty. So you have simply the idea of phase shift and form, which can give rise to justice and order and law and will, or it can strangle and become a dictatorship, a tyranny, an oppression, etc. All right, let's move on to number 7. So number 7 on the tree of light / knowledge is a Lilith. A Lilith is represented in Gnostic lore by a variety of things, usually by either or both peace and discernment, okay? Peace and discernment. I'm sure we all know what peace is, and discernment is the ability to choose one thing over another, to discern between things. So what a Lilith represents is, in the Neogenian system, is what we call qualitative resonance. Now, this might sound kind of abstract at first, but let me break it down. If you want more details on everything that I'm talking about, go back to the last video. I go into a lot of detail on all this. So I'm summing it up shortly here. So we already have, through Autogenes, the idea of a subjective center of awareness. And through Davathai, we have, and through Protophanes, we have frequency. Through Davathai, we have amplitude. Through Harmazel, we have phase. So we have waves doing different things. But with each of these things comes with it a certain experience. So what qualitative resonance, said in a simplified way, so it's not completely accurate, but a simplified way, is the impetus of a subjective center to move towards positive patterns or positive qualia, patterns that elicit a positive experience or positive qualia. And so what I mean by that is, remember with Kalyptos, we had experience in general. Protophanes, we have a variety of experiences, and there can be pleasant experiences and there can be painful experiences or unpleasant experiences or negative experiences. So a Lilith, as qualitative resonance, represents the movement towards patterns that elicit a positive, pleasant experience. Positive, pleasant, none of these words are completely accurate, but you can see where I'm going with this. And you can understand this in a simplified way. If you hold your hand over a fire, you're going to move your hand away. If you're in a certain room, there's a guy like, hey, if you stay in this room, I'm going to torture you. And in another room, there's a guy going, hey, you come in this room, you get free cake for life. You're going to move away from the torture chamber and towards free cake for life. That's a very crude way to explain what's going on at a very, very, very fundamental level. It's our impetus to move towards patterns that elicit a positive or pleasant experience and away from a pattern that elicits a negative or unpleasant experience. So that's what a Lilith as peace and discernment represents in terms of qualitative resonance. The corresponding sefakot is Netzach or Netzach. I prefer saying Netzach because Netzach sounds way too much like nutsack to me. But whatever you want to call it, Netzach or Netzach is called victory. Okay? So Netzach is called victory and represents emotion, desire, love. And that should make sense when we're talking about in terms of qualitative resonance. In Netzach, this represents positive emotions like love, desire, etc. The corresponding Kalyptos is Arab Zarak or Arab Zarak, or you can just say Zarak for short. Netzach, Zarak, they correspond to each other. So how this gets represent, so Arab Zarak is called the ravens of dispersion, but we can also think of it as war. Okay? So if a Lilith is peace and Netzach is victory, Arab Zarak is war. Zarak represents conflict, negative emotions, hate, anger, and scattered emotions. Confused, scattered, hateful, angry. So this is what happens when qualitative resonance gets confused in some way. You move towards patterns that are positive, which is what you do in Netzach. But in Zarak, guess what? Through religious systems, brainwashing, propaganda, biological factors, what we discern as being positive isn't always positive. And so we can essentially begin to use the patterns of hatred and negative emotions and anger and have it scattered and confused. Okay? So a Lilith, peace and discernment, movement towards positive structures. Netzach, emotion, love. And Arab Zarak, dispersion and movement that ultimately takes us to destructive patterns. Anger, wrath, etc. Our discernment has become confused and we move to destructive patterns and engage in war rather than victory. But underlying it is a Lilith. So let's move on. I'm going to go a little faster here because this is taking longer than it should because I talk too much. We're going to move on to Auroriel, which is kind of a mouthful. Auroriel is an eon, and Auroriel is essentially associated with conceptualization. Conceptualization. And what does she represent in terms of the tree of light? I say she, but these are all genderless, by the way. They're all androgynous. I tend to think of the luminaries as some of the like I tend to think of a Lilith as feminine, but it isn't. A Lilith is described as a he in Gnostic lore, but it's whatever resonates with you. They're ultimately in the tree of light. All the eons are ultimately androgynous, and have a male-female pair that resolves in androgyny. So it doesn't matter. Anyway, I said I wasn't going to talk quicker, and I'm lying. I'm talking way too much now. What does Auroriel represent in terms of the source formula? Well, we move on over to this thing here, which seems kind of daunting, but it really isn't. This is known as a Fourier transform, and you can see that this right here, right, this part right here is just this. Okay? It's just this. All right, it's this. That's what this is. And what this symbol here, this sigma from negative infinity to infinity, is just saying add up a bunch of these together. Add a bunch of these together. And remember, this is waves. So this is it's wave addition. So it's harmonic wave addition. It's the ability to add harmonic waves together to construct more complicated waves. And because we're in the realm of light, in the realm of thought, it's adding thoughts together to create compound thoughts or higher thoughts or more complex thoughts. So rather than these waves existing in isolation, they're now being added together to form higher structures. That's what Oriel represents, ultimately the combination of waveforms, thought forms, for more complex waveforms, more complex thought forms. In terms of the tree of life, this corresponds to Hod, which means splendor, and Samael on the Kalyptos, which means the venom of God. And what Hod represents is essentially left brain thinking, analysis, logic, reason, and clarity of thought. Okay? So it's using reason, using logic, clarity of thought, intellectualization, left brain modes, linear left brain modes of thinking. And that makes a lot of sense when we have Oriel, which is the foundation of all that, which is simple thought addition, adding thoughts together to create more complex thoughts. So in Hod, we have the experience of doing that in terms of intellectualization, logic, and analysis, etc. Samael, the poison of God, is twisted intellectualization. It's where you intellectualize things until you reduce reality to a mechanistic, lifeless machine, or you intellectualize things to such a degree that you hyperfixate and you overthink, or it is also doubt. You begin to, you enter into a mode of high skepticism where you doubt everything. These are, of course, still complex thoughts being added together, but in a, you can see, twisted and destructive form. So hopefully you're seeing the pattern now. Tree of knowledge or light is the foundation, and it gets expressed in a way that is either harmonious or twisted. Okay? So let's move on to eon number 9, which is Sophia. So Sophia is wisdom in Gnostic lore. And wisdom, Sophia is ultimately responsible for the creation of the material reality. So yes, she isn't, we haven't gotten to the material reality yet, but it's the code, let's say it's like the coding that allows for that. So what does that mean in terms of what we've been talking about? Sophia is simply the frequency domain. So we've been talking about all these different properties of light waves, whether it's amplitude or frequency or phase or wave addition. Sophia is the domain where all of this takes place. So anytime you get to this particular sphere, whether it's on the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, or the tree of death, the 9th is always about, think of it as like a mixing bowl where everything we've talked about gets united in here. You can think of these like as ingredients, and you're putting them in the bowl. You haven't yet put it in the oven and it hasn't become a cake yet, but it will. But Sophia is the mixing bowl and the frequency domain, the domain of frequencies in terms of the Neogenian interpretation of the Gnostic tree. So what does this correspond to? In the tree of life, this is Yesod. Yesod is called the foundation and represents the personal unconscious. Yesod is the personal unconscious and the foundation. If we're thinking of cosmology, it's the foundation of the material world, not yet the material world, that's down here. But in terms of personal psychology, it represents the personal unconscious. And over here on the tree of death, we have Gamaliel. Gamaliel is known as the obscene one, and Gamaliel represents the shadow self, nightmares, repressed fantasies, okay? All the dark, repressed parts of yourself. So then let's move down finally to here. Now, here's an important thing. So in the Neogenian interpretation, Sophia gives birth to twins, Zoe and Akamoth, twin daughters. Zoe means life, Akamoth means death. So Sophia gives birth to twins of life and death. And this is where Zoe, the 10th, will give rise to the tree of life, and Akamoth, death, will give rise to the tree of death. And so whereas Sophia is putting all the ingredients together in a bowl, kind of like you have Zoe and Akamoth is then putting it in the oven, and then out comes the baked cake. Baked cake is tree of life or tree of death. I don't have this zoomed out enough. This is still not zoomed out enough, but you see what I mean, okay? So Zoe gives rise to the tree of life, and Akamoth gives rise to the tree of death. So what do they represent, these twins? They represent something known as the Fourier transform. And essentially, it would take a long time to go into this, but essentially, we have in here and here, okay? Essentially this formula. This formula here is here and here, but they're expressed in inverted ways. This is called the Fourier transform. This is called the inverse Fourier transform. And so the both Zoe and Akamoth have the power of both, but one is predominantly more than the other. So Akamoth is associated with the inverse Fourier transform, and Zoe is predominantly associated with the Fourier transform. But because they're linked, you can't separate them. They can still have both, but one is predominantly more than the other. So what does this mean? Well, the inverse Fourier transform takes frequency information and converts it into space or time information. And the Fourier transform does the opposite. It takes space or time information and converts it into frequency information. So you have the idea of creating, of sort of taking light and twisting it into matter, or taking matter and restoring it into light. So Zoe is the extension of Sophia's light, which extends throughout the tree of life. Akamoth is when it gets thrown out of balance and is Sophia's shadow, and Sophia's shadow gets expressed as the tree of death. Okay? So real quick as well, we can also associate archons with the tree of death, and I won't go into a lot of detail with that right now, but just really quick, I'm just going to mention it really quick. I've done so many videos on associating the archons with the tree of death, but if you're new, I'll just run through them real quick so you know. Talmiel is associated with Yaldabaoth, the demiurge. Gohagiel is associated with Saklis, which means the fool, and is an aspect of the demiurge. Satariel is associated with Nibruel, who means the rebel. Gahag Shakla is represented by Athoth. Galachav is represented by Harmas. Thagarian is represented by Typhon. Arab Zerak is represented by Tsabaoth. Samael is represented by Agrat Bat Malat, which is a sister of Lilith. And Gamaliel is the archon of Gamaliel is Hekate, the triple goddess. And finally, the archon of Lilith is Aishet Senunim, which is another archon of another sister of Lilith. Okay, you don't need to know all that. I just wanted to say it for completeness' sake that we have associated archons with the Klipot as well in our synthesis of Gnosticism with Kabbalah. Okay, but going back to what we're talking about, all right? In a nutshell, Zoe emanates the tree of life as the extension of Sophia's light, and Akamoth as Sophia's shadow. twists the light into the tree of death, which is the realm of the Kalyptos and the Archons. Akamoth gives birth to Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth gives birth to all the other Archons. So, in terms of how this relates as well, is Zoe and Akamoth in the Tree of Life is the foundation of Malkuth or Malchut and Lilith or Lilith. So here is the idea. What Malkuth represents is called the kingdom. And Malkuth as representing the kingdom, in terms of cosmology, it would be like the material world. But in terms of, if we're looking at a psychological aspect, it means the senses and action, behavior, right? So like if this is the unconscious, Malkuth is your senses and the actions that you take in your behavioral patterns. And of course, Malkuth then would be represented by positive behavioral patterns. Lilith is represented by negative behavioral patterns, such as greed, lust, envy. But it's not all bad. Also, rebellion. Rebellion sounds bad, but rebellion is a good thing. None of these are good nor bad. All of these energies can be used in a positive way. Okay? Like Samael's doubt can be used to doubt faulty belief systems. So it's not about, these aren't necessarily bad, they're just misaligned, and you have to transform them. So with the Tree of Life, you're basically aligning yourself with the Tree of Life and transforming the Tree of Death. Okay? Psychologically speaking, that's what's happening. You align with the Tree of Life and you align with the energy of the Tree of Life and transform the energy of the Tree of Death. But here's the interesting thing. In Kabbalah, Malchut is often associated with Eve, okay? So Malchut is often associated with Eve. And here's the cool thing, is that in Kabbalah, Lilith is the shadow of Eve. So that makes a lot of sense to have Lilith here as the shadow of Eve. But here's the other cool thing, is that in Gnosticism, when Zoe descends into the material realm, she becomes Eve. But importantly, not the material Eve, more like Eve's higher self. The material Eve gets created later. But this is like Zoe in the form of the goddess Eve, Eve's higher self. The higher self version of what would be the material Eve. Okay, so this is the higher Eve. And so Eve also, by the way, comes from the Hebrew word chava, which means life. So Eve means life on the Tree of Life, and is an extension of Zoe, which is which also means life in Greek. And so the higher Eve is the one who ultimately brings the light of knowledge and helps Adam wake up. Remember, as the higher Eve, not the material Eve. And in certain books like The Origin of the World, she actually becomes the serpent. Eve becomes the Tree of Life and the serpent, or not, sorry, the tree of knowledge and the serpent. And so Eve, the higher self Eve, gets the material Adam and Eve to eat from the Tree of Knowledge. Okay? So Eve as life is an extension of Zoe, which means life, and Eve gets the material lower Adam and Eve to eat from the Tree of Knowledge. Okay? Lilith is the shadow of Eve in our synthesis here, and is the representation of the shadow of Akamoth in the Tree of Death. So Eve is the extension of Zoe in the Tree of Life. Akamoth is the extension, Lilith is the extension of Akamoth in the Tree of Death, the rebellious one. Because remember, Sophia rebels in a certain way, again, contrary to the one and her partner, which is what produces her shadow, which is Akamoth. So Akamoth is born out of rebellion. Akamoth is born out of rebellion. And so Lilith is the representation of Akamoth in the tree of death, where Eve is the representation of Zoe in the tree of life. And in Gnostic lore, particularly Valentinian Gnostic lore, Akamoth generates the material realm as well through her emotions. So Akamoth's confusion and ignorance gets expressed as matter. Let me write that down because I need to actually make a video about that. So Akamoth's confusion and ignorance gets expressed as matter because Akamoth wakes up in the dark and she thinks that she's the only being in existence, and so she's lonely and ignorant and confused. That becomes matter. Her tears become the river and the rain and all the bodies of water. Her smile becomes the dawn and all light, etc. So very much associated with the material world. Okay, so this is how Zoe and Akamoth, the twins of Sophia, get expressed. Fundamentally, it's the Fourier transform and inverse Fourier transform, which one turns matter into light, the other light into matter, as Eve, the bringer of light and knowledge, Lilith, the carnal, lustful, and also vengeful and rebellious force, expressed on the tree of death as Akamoth's energy. Okay? So, but even so, remember, Akamoth generates all this, and Zoe generates all this, but they kind of are also very much tied to this one, the bottom-most sphere, because that is what they correspond to in terms of mapping them one-to-one. Okay, so we have one final sphere to talk about. So you notice the tree of life is 10, the tree of death is 11, and the tree of knowledge is 12. Okay, so let's talk about this. So on the tree of light / knowledge, we have Phosphoros, which means the light bringer. Okay, so we have Phosphoros, the light bringer, and hold on here, bring up my notes. So we have Phosphoros, the light bringer, and is essentially the Greek name for Lucifer. But don't think of Lucifer as Satan. Satan is over here, okay? So don't think of Lucifer as Satan. Satan is not Lucifer. So Phosphoros is the light bringer, and is also associated in Gnostic lore and in the Neogenian interpretation, where this is also Adamus, Eye of Light. Adamus, Eye of Light is the perfect pattern of humanity, and Adamus means indestructible. So Adamus, Eye of Light is the indestructible Eye of Light. The indestructible Eye of Light. Okay? So what Adamus represents, or Phosphoros represents, in terms of our system here, is telos. Telos is the Greek word for purpose, and it's a very specific purpose. It means the purpose of a return to unity, raising consciousness and a return to unity. A telos, the purposeful return to unity. That is what Phosphoros, or Adamus, Eye of Light, the indestructible Eye of Light, represents. And by the way, that they are, who is the partner of Sophia. So they are linked, the partner of Sophia. Now, the 12th eon, the Eye of Light, can either, it always exists, but it either exists as open or closed. the eye of light can be open or closed. When it is closed, okay, so Phosphoros corresponds on the tree of life to Da'at, and Satan on the tree of death. Da'at means knowledge. So are you seeing the connection here? Knowledge, Lucifer, Satan, or the light bringer, who is typically associated with knowledge, but the church has often twisted it into an interpretation of Satan. So let's talk about this. Phosphoros simply is the return to unity and is the eye of light, which is either open or closed. It is closed when da'at or knowledge has not been achieved. Da'at or knowledge has not been achieved. One falls into the abyss and Satan takes over. So the Phosphoros always exists, but the eye of light is closed when da'at or knowledge is not achieved, and instead Satan reigns. Satan, the Kalyptos Satan, means lies. Satan is the father of lies. So da'at is knowledge and Satan is lies. Without going into too much detail, in a simplified way, da'at as knowledge is also associated with gnosis. Da'at is Hebrew for knowledge. Gnosis is Greek for knowledge. So da'at is gnosis. And in the Neogenian system, da'at is hyper-awareness, okay? Higher consciousness, hyper-awareness. And da'at represents the integration of chokhmah and binah, which is wisdom and understanding. So it's the integration of wisdom and understanding into knowledge. And when we say knowledge, I don't just mean like knowledge, like collecting facts, but knowing, okay? It's not information gathering, like collecting facts like Pokemon cards. It's it's the synthesis of wisdom and understanding into true knowledge. Understanding and knowledge of what you are, of what we all are, of what existence is. Higher consciousness, gnosis achieved, okay? But when that doesn't properly occur, instead what you have is Satan taking over. And Satan is not knowledge, is lies, and represents the combination of confusion and hindrance with illusion. So you have confusion and hindrance knitted together by Satariel into illusion, which becomes lies in Satan. So Satan is the father of lies. So here's the idea. When you properly integrate da'at and achieve gnosis and knowledge, Satan doesn't go away, but you reorganize its energy, meaning you become able to see through the lie. You gain that power of understanding how illusion works, the power to see through illusion, the master of lies, so to speak. It's like understanding how the magician's trick is done. The trick still occurs, but now you know how it's done. So you gain that power. So when you integrate knowledge, you achieve gnosis, and Satan is you're no longer falling for the lies of Satan, but you understand that it is an aspect of yourself that represents the ability to understand how illusion works. Okay, so you're able to see through illusion because you understand the power of illusion. Not because you destroy it, like the illusion still occurs, but you understand how it works. You gain knowledge. And when that happens, that's when the eye of light opens, because now you are returning to, you understand why a return to unity is necessary to occur. You're not falling for the lies of Satan that says you're just dust in the wind, or who says that, oh, we're all separate and there's no unity, or who says that you can become God above everyone. Instead, you understand that we are all united in multiplicity and that we are all individual gods within an interconnected, unified system. And that's when the eye of light, Phosphoros, opens, Adam eye of light opens in that case. And so Phosphoros expression in the tree of life is knowledge or da'at, and its expression on the tree of death is its shadow as Satan. And here we can really get a good understanding too of like the difference between Lucifer and Satan and all that. because people often think that Lucifer is Satan. That is not the case. We can understand in this scheme as Satan as being the shadow of Lucifer, or what happens when the eye of light is closed. But when knowledge is achieved and that energy is properly directed, the eye of light opens once again, and a return to unity begins. Also, by the way, the archon associated with number 11, I forgot to mention, the archon associated with Satan is a being called Adamus the Tyrant, okay? And is sort of the shadow form or twisted version of Adamus Eye of Light. But here's the key, is that really Adamus the Tyrant is actually Adama the Tyrant. So Adama means dirt, and so he's really a tyrant of dirt, a tyrant of illusion, a tyrant of degradation. And in a Gnostic book called Pistis Sophia, the tyrant is the one who is oppressing Sophia and keeping her in the lower realms, when Adamas is the consort of Sophia. So it's very cool when you see that Adamus is the consort of Sophia, but when the eye is closed, the shadow form of that oppresses Sophia and keeps her in darkness. So let's see here. Okay, that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I hope that made sense. And as always, if you make it to the end of this video, be proud of yourself, because people rarely do. This stuff is hard for many, many people. And so they click off. They would have clicked off 30, 45 minutes ago. Even if you don't completely understand it, that's totally fine. Just the fact that you've made it through this far means that you have that telos, that impetus towards knowledge, gnosis, and understanding. And that's extremely rare. So I know some people sometimes feel down about themselves because they don't maybe not get all of it. This is high level information. We're talking about some of the highest modes of consciousness that we can achieve here is being discussed. So just be proud of yourself for making it this way. Things will begin to click into place. If you haven't seen the previous video for this, I'm going to put a link to it at once I get this uploaded up here where you'll be able to find it. Check it out. As always, with these videos, your feedback is extremely important. So please tell me in the comments what you thought, what you think, if you have questions, if you need more explanation, etc. But thank you so much, my friends. Remember, this is way more than a channel. We are here to wake the world the fuck up. So hit like, share, subscribe, spread this like fire. If you want to help out even more, become a member. You'll get access to a lot of great stuff like free downloads I've put together on alchemy, Kabbalah, rituals, etc. You'll also get access to free members only videos. There are probably hundreds of them by now. In fact, we're recording one right after this called "Why Would a Loving God Create Hell?" The truth will shock you. And it's not what you think. So that's what we're doing there. You can also check out my books. And if you're looking for a free way to support, follow me over on Spotify. It's a great way to reach new people with this information on this platform. Links to all of those things, my books and Spotify channel, they're in the description, and link to join as a member, they're in the description of this video. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, Dallas, Nucelina, Eric, Sandy, Soul, Vivian, Toronado, Son of God, Banshee, Pop Out, Hyper Saiyan Malcolm, and everyone else over here. Thank you all very much. My name is Morgue. I'm Neogenian, and Ad Astra.